The flickering neon sign of Whitaker's Antiques and Curiosity buzzed against the darkened street, casting a sickly yellow glow over the damp pavement. Evelyn Carter pulled her scarf tighter against the chill, her breath fogging as she hesitated outside the door. The shop looked inconspicuous, wedged between a boarded-up bookstore and a diner that had long since closed its doors. "Come on, Evie," her brother Jack urged. He was already inside, his silhouette framed by the uneven light spilling from the windows. With a sigh, Evelyn pushed open the creaky door, a small bell above it jingling. The scent of musty paper, old leather, and a faint metallic tang filled her nostrils. Rows of cluttered shelves towered above her, crammed with tarnished silverware, faded books, and objects she couldn't begin to name. Jack was standing near the counter, chatting animatedly with the shopkeeper, an elderly man whose milky eyes suggested failing sight but whose sharp voice betrayed no frailty. "This place gives me the creeps," Evelyn muttered, walking over to join them. Jack grinned, holding up a crumbling piece of parchment. "Not for long. Check this out." The shopkeeper's gnarled hand rested protectively over the map as if reluctant to let it go. "It's not just any map," he rasped. "It's the map. Found it tucked away in an estate auction a decade ago, but no one's ever dared follow it." "Why not?" Jack asked, his curiosity outweighing his sense of caution. The shopkeeper gave a toothless grin. "Because it leads to the devil's lair." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Come on, Jack, let's go." "This is ridiculous." But her brother wasn't listening. "What's in the lair?" he pressed. "Treasure," the shopkeeper said, leaning closer. "Gold, jewels, relics from a time before man walked the earth. But it's cursed, boy, guarded by things no sane man would dare face." The air seemed to grow heavier, the dim light of the shop casting long shadows across the floor. Evelyn shivered, though the room wasn't cold. "Sounds like a ghost story," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The old man chuckled, his laugh dry and brittle. "Believe what you want, but mark my words. That map will only bring you misery." Despite Evelyn's protests, Jack bought the map. They pored over it that night in their small apartment, spreading it across the kitchen table. The parchment was fragile, the ink faded, but the details were unmistakable. A dense forest, a winding river, and, marked with an ominous X, a cave nestled in the shadow of a jagged mountain. "It's not far from here," Jack said, excitement lighting up his face. "A few hours' drive, tops." Evelyn frowned, tracing the map with her finger. "You seriously want to go? This could be a prank. Or worse, a trap." Jack leaned back in his chair, grinning. "You're always so negative. Think about it, Evie. If there's even a sliver of truth to this, we could be rich. Set for life. And if it's dangerous?" she countered. "We'll be careful," Jack said, brushing her concerns aside. By morning, they were packed and ready. Jack drove, his energy infectious despite Evelyn's lingering unease. The map guided them deeper into rural territory, past desolate towns and stretches of forest that seemed untouched by time. The air grew heavier the closer they got, the vibrant colors of the autumn trees dulling into lifeless shades of brown and gray. Even the sun seemed to falter, casting weak, sickly light through the thinning canopy. By late afternoon, they reached the spot marked on the map. The cave's entrance yawned before them, a jagged maw in the side of the mountain. The surrounding area was eerily silent. No birds, no insects, just the occasional rustle of dry leaves in the wind. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "This is a bad idea," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack ignored her, pulling a flashlight from his bag. "Come on, Evie. You didn't come all this way to chicken out now." Reluctantly, she followed him inside. The air grew colder as they descended, the light from the entrance fading quickly. The cave walls were slick with moisture, and the faint echo of dripping water was the only sound. Jack's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing strange carvings on the walls, symbols and figures that looked ancient, almost alien. "What do you think this means?" he asked, his voice reverberating in the confined space. "I don't want to know," Evelyn replied, her unease growing with every step. They pushed deeper into the cave, the path narrowing and twisting in ways that made Evelyn feel like the walls were closing in. Then they saw it. A massive stone door, intricately carved with the same symbols from the walls. Jack's face lit up with excitement. This is it. The treasure has to be behind here. He pushed against the door, and to Evelyn's surprise, it gave way with a low, rumbling groan. The air that escaped was thick and foul, carrying a metallic tang that made her gag. Beyond the door was a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. The faint glow of Jack's flashlight revealed piles of gold coins, glittering jewels, and ornate artifacts scattered across the floor. We hit the jackpot, Jack breathed, stepping forward. Wait, Evelyn said, grabbing his arm. Something doesn't feel right, but it was too late. The moment Jack crossed the threshold, the ground beneath them trembled. A low growl echoed through the chamber, guttural and menacing, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jack froze, his eyes wide with fear. What was that? Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to. The shadows at the edges of the chamber began to shift, coalescing into shapes that were anything but human. The guardians had awakened. Evelyn and Jack turned to run, but the stone door slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. The growls grew louder, and the monstrous shapes stepped into the dim light, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. Evelyn's heart raced as she backed against the wall, her flashlight flickering. Jack, she whispered, her voice trembling. What have we done? And then, from the depths of the chamber, came a voice, low, ancient, and filled with malice. You were warned. The chamber was alive. Every shadow writhed like a living thing, stretching and contorting into impossible shapes. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps as her flashlight flickered, casting the grotesque figures into momentary relief. Each creature was more horrifying than the last. Twisted forms of claws, sinew, and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. Jack, what do we do? She hissed, clutching her brother's arm. But Jack was frozen, his eyes fixed on the towering figure emerging from the center of the chamber. It was humanoid, but only in the loosest sense. Its limbs were too long, its head crowned with jagged horns that scraped the unseen ceiling. The glow from its eyes illuminated the cursed treasure at its feet. You have trespassed, the creature boomed, its voice reverberating through the chamber like a thunderclap. We didn't know, Jack stammered, stepping back. His hands were raised, as though surrendering to a cop rather than an ancient, otherworldly being. Evelyn pulled at him, trying to drag him toward the now sealed stone door. We have to get out of here. The creature laughed, a sound like grinding stone and breaking bones. Out, it mocked. You cannot leave. You belong to the guardians now. The floor trembled as more shapes emerged from the shadows, each one grotesque and unique. Evelyn's flashlight went out entirely, leaving them in near-total darkness. The only light came from the creature's eyes, burning like cold fire. Run! Evelyn screamed, adrenaline surging through her body. She pulled Jack with all her strength, and finally, he snapped out of his trance, stumbling after her. They sprinted toward the stone door, the sound of claws scraping against the floor growing louder behind them. Jack pounded on the door, his fists striking the cold stone. Open! Open! Damn it! Stop wasting time! Evelyn cried, frantically running her hands over the carvings on the door. They glowed faintly, the symbols pulsing with an eerie light. It's a puzzle, she realized aloud, her voice shaking. The symbols, they're some kind of lock. Jack looked over his shoulder. The creatures were closing in, their guttural growls filling the air. Hurry! Evelyn's mind raced, trying to remember the carvings they'd seen on the walls of the cave. There had to be a sequence, a pattern. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the first symbol, a spiral etched deep into the stone. Nothing happened. She tried another, then another. The ground beneath them shook violently, and she lost her balance, falling hard against the door. They're getting closer, Jack shouted, his voice cracking with panic. The lead guardian lunged, its claws swiping inches from Evelyn's face. Jack grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature, but it didn't even flinch. "Evie, now!" he yelled, positioning himself between her and the advancing monsters. Evelyn pressed the symbols again, this time in a different order. The carvings pulsed brighter, and with a deafening crack, the door creaked open just wide enough for them to slip through. "Go, go, go!" Jack screamed, pushing Evelyn ahead of him. They dove through the gap as the creatures lunged, the door slamming shut behind them with a force that rattled the entire cave. The siblings collapsed on the cold stone floor, gasping for breath. The sounds of the guardian's claws scratching against the other side of the door sent chills down Evelyn's spine. "What the hell were those things?" Jack panted, clutching his side. "I don't know," Evelyn whispered, her voice raw. "But they're not natural. This whole place," she gestured to the tunnel ahead of them, lined with more glowing carvings. "It's not natural." Jack's flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating their surroundings. The tunnel was narrower than before, forcing them to walk single file. Strange whispers echoed around them, just barely audible, as though the walls themselves were alive. Evelyn stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed on the floor. There were markings in the dust, fresh footprints that didn't belong to them. "We're not alone," she said, her voice barely audible. Jack's face went pale. "You think someone else followed the map?" Evelyn shook her head. "No. These are barefoot. Whoever or whatever made them isn't human." The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first but no less ominous. The walls were lined with more artifacts, golden idols, bejeweled daggers, and urns that seemed to hum faintly. "Don't touch anything," Evelyn warned, her voice sharp. Jack nodded, but his eyes lingered on a small, intricately carved box on a pedestal. It seemed to pulse faintly, as though calling to him. "Jack," Evelyn snapped, grabbing his arm. "Let's keep moving." He reluctantly tore his gaze away, following her toward the far end of the room. But as they stepped forward, the floor beneath them shifted. A loud click echoed through the chamber, followed by the grinding of gears. "Trap!" Evelyn shouted, diving to the side as a row of spears shot out of the walls, narrowly missing her. Jack wasn't as lucky. One of the spears grazed his arm, drawing blood. He cried out, clutching the wound. "We need to get out of here," he gasped, his face pale. Evelyn helped him to his feet, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of another exit. Her flashlight landed on an archway partially obscured by rubble. "There," she said, dragging Jack toward it. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as the chamber began to collapse, the sound of stone crashing against stone deafening. The new passage was even darker than the one before, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Evelyn's flashlight flickered again, and this time it didn't come back on. "Jack, do you have another light?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack didn't respond. "Jack," she repeated, turning to face him. But he was gone. The tunnel stretched into darkness, and the faint sound of whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to be calling her name. "Jack!" Evelyn shouted, her voice echoing back at her. From the darkness ahead, a pair of glowing eyes appeared. Evelyn's heart pounded as she stood frozen in the pitch-black tunnel. Her flashlight was useless, and the only light came from the faint, eerie glow of the eyes watching her from the depths of the darkness. "Jack!" she called again, her voice cracking. The glowing eyes didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, their haunting cadence filling the narrow passage. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, wrapping around her like a cold, suffocating fog. Her instincts screamed at her to run. But where? Jack was gone, and the creatures behind the sealed door would surely break through eventually. Evelyn forced herself to focus, her hands fumbling with her backpack. She found her lighter and flicked it on. The small flame barely pierced the oppressive darkness, but it was enough to reveal the outline of the passage ahead. The glowing eyes had vanished. Evelyn took a shaky breath and moved forward, holding the lighter high. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, its walls covered in strange symbols that pulsed faintly as she passed. She felt as though she was being watched, though every time she turned, there was nothing but darkness. "Stay calm," she muttered to herself. "Find Jack." Get out. The whispers followed her, growing softer and louder in waves, as though the very air was alive. Occasionally, she thought she heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, but when she stopped to listen, the sound vanished. The tunnel began to widen, and soon she found herself in another chamber. This one was smaller than the previous rooms, its floor littered with broken pottery and scattered bones. A single object stood out among the debris, a large, ornate mirror, its frame intricately carved with figures that twisted and writhed as she approached. Evelyn's stomach churned. The figures weren't just carvings. They were moving, their tiny, grotesque faces contorted in silent screams. "Jack," she called softly, her voice trembling. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and a faint image began to form. Evelyn stepped closer, unable to look away. The mirror showed a scene that was both familiar and alien. The antique shop where they had found the map. Evelyn saw herself and Jack standing at the counter, the dusty parchment spread between them. But something was different. Behind the shopkeeper, a shadowy figure loomed, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Evelyn stumbled back, her heart racing. "What is this?" The image shifted, now showing the entrance to the cave. She watched as she and Jack descended into the darkness, unaware of the countless glowing eyes watching them from the shadows. The whispers grew louder, their words becoming clearer. "You should not have come. You should not have come." Evelyn clutched her head, trying to block out the sound. The mirror's surface rippled again, and this time, she saw Jack. He was in another part of the cave, his flashlight flickering as he stumbled through the darkness. Something was following him. "Jack!" Evelyn shouted, reaching out to touch the mirror. The surface was cold and slick, like ice. As soon as her fingers made contact, the mirror shattered, sending shards flying across the room. Evelyn shielded her face, the whispers turning into a deafening roar. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was gone. In its place was an archway, carved with the same twisting figures. Evelyn hesitated. The whispers were gone, but the silence was almost worse. She stepped through the archway, the air growing colder with each step. The new passage was unlike anything she had seen before. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and the floor sloped downward at a steep angle. The faint glow from the symbols illuminated the way, casting strange, flickering shadows. As she descended, Evelyn noticed markings on the walls, tally marks etched deep into the stone. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. "Who did this?" she whispered, running her fingers over the grooves. The air grew heavier, and a new sound emerged. A low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the depths of the tunnel. Evelyn's grip on her lighter tightened as she pressed forward. The slope leveled out, and she found herself in yet another chamber. This one was dominated by a massive stone door, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. A figure was slumped against the door. "Jack!" Evelyn cried, rushing to his side. Jack's face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. Blood seeped from a deep gash on his leg, pooling on the cold stone floor. "Evie?" he murmured, his eyes fluttering open. "It's me," she said, kneeling beside him. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Jack's eyes darted to the shadows. "They're coming," he whispered. "We have to leave. Now." Evelyn glanced around, but the chamber seemed empty. "Who's coming?" "The creatures from before." Jack shook his head weakly. "Worse. The Guardians. They don't want us to leave." Evelyn helped him to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulders. "Come on, we'll find another way out." As they turned to leave, the stone door behind them began to tremble. The symbols pulsed brighter, and the growl from earlier returned, louder and more menacing. "What's behind that door?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. Jack's face was ashen. "The treasure. And its keeper." The door cracked open, releasing a wave of frigid air that extinguished Evelyn's lighter. In the pitch-black chamber, a pair of massive, glowing eyes appeared, staring directly at them. "Run," Jack whispered, his voice trembling. But it was too late. The door burst open, and the creature emerged, its towering form blocking any chance of escape. Evelyn stood frozen in place, her heart pounding like a drum. The immense creature that emerged from the stone door towered over her and Jack, its grotesque form barely discernible in the flickering glow of the cave's faint light. Its massive, serpentine body coiled in the shadows, and long, skeletal arms ended in claws that scraped against the stone floor. The glowing eyes that had haunted Evelyn's journey burned brighter, their malevolence piercing through the dark. "Evelyn," Jack croaked, his voice barely audible. "Don't look at it. Move. Now." But Evelyn couldn't move. Her body was paralyzed by fear, her breath shallow as the creature stepped forward, its heavy limbs shaking the ground beneath their feet. A guttural sound filled the chamber, halfway between a growl and a deep, resonant chuckle. The keeper leaned forward, its skeletal face mere feet from Evelyn's. Its jaw opened unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth that gleamed like obsidian. "You seek what is not yours," it said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Evelyn's knees buckled, but she held her ground, clutching Jack's arm tightly for support. "We didn't mean to disturb you," she stammered. "We'll leave. Just let us go." The keeper tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Leave? After trespassing in my domain? After desecrating what I protect?" Jack groaned, leaning heavily against Evelyn. "It's not going to let us leave, Evie. It's playing with us." The keeper's grin widened, confirming Jack's fears. Evelyn scanned the chamber, her mind racing. The massive stone door was wide open now, revealing a smaller room beyond. Piles of glittering treasure, gold, jewels, and artifacts, were heaped inside, their beauty starkly contrasted by the sinister aura that surrounded them. "Jack," she whispered, keeping her eyes on the creature. "Can you stand?" "Barely," he muttered, wincing in pain. "What are you thinking?" She glanced at the treasure. "It's guarding that hoard. Maybe if we distract it." Before she could finish her thought, the keeper lunged. Evelyn barely had time to pull Jack out of the way as the creature's claws slammed into the ground where they had been standing moments before, sending shards of stone flying. "Go!" she shouted, dragging Jack toward the chamber's edge. They stumbled through the open door, Evelyn practically carrying Jack. The treasure room was suffocatingly cold, the air thick with the metallic tang of centuries-old gold. As the pair entered, the whispers returned, louder than ever, rising to a fevered pitch. "Evelyn," Jack gasped, his face pale. This isn't just treasure. It's cursed. Look." Evelyn turned to see what he meant. Amid the gold and jewels, skeletal remains were scattered throughout the hoard. Some still clutched weapons, their eyeless sockets staring accusingly. "Every treasure hunter who came here," Evelyn murmured, realization dawning. "This is what happened to them." Behind them, the keeper roared, its massive frame blocking the door, crouched, preparing to strike. "Wait!" Evelyn shouted, holding up her hands. "Please, we don't want the treasure. We'll leave it, I swear." The keeper paused, its eyes narrowing. "You expect mercy after defiling what is sacred?" Evelyn's mind raced. "What is this place? Why is it sacred to you?" The keeper's gaze softened slightly, though its voice remained cold. "This cave is a tomb, a sanctum for those who fell in ancient battles. Their spirits guard the treasures they once carried, and I am their keeper. No one may take what lies here." "We didn't know," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "We'll leave everything as it was. Just let us go." The creature leaned closer, studying her. "You will leave but not unscathed. A price must be paid." "What price?" Evelyn asked cautiously. The keeper's grin returned, its sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "Your memories of this place. You will forget what you have seen, what you have endured. And one of you must offer your blood to seal the pact." Jack tensed. "No way. That's insane." Evelyn looked at him, then back at the keeper. "If we agree, will you let us leave alive?" "You have my word," it replied. Jack tried to protest, but Evelyn silenced him with a look. "I'll do it," she said, stepping forward. The keeper's claws moved swiftly, slicing a shallow cut across Evelyn's palm. She winced but didn't pull away. Blood dripped onto the cold stone floor, and the symbols on the walls flared brightly. "It is done," the keeper said, stepping aside. Evelyn and Jack moved quickly, the keeper's glowing eyes following them as they left the treasure chamber. The symbols along the walls pulsed rhythmically, guiding them back through the tunnels. When they finally emerged into the moonlit forest, Evelyn collapsed onto the ground, her chest heaving. Jack leaned against a tree, clutching his injured leg. Did that really happen?" Jack asked, his voice shaky. Evelyn stared at her bloodied palm, the cut already starting to fade. "I don't know. I don't remember." As they looked back at the cave, its entrance shimmered and disappeared, leaving only an unbroken wall of stone behind. The forest felt alive. Every tree seemed to lean inward, their gnarled branches reaching for Evelyn and Jack as if trying to pull them back to the cave they had narrowly escaped. The air was heavy with a damp chill, and the faint whispers that had plagued them in the cave still echoed in Evelyn's mind. "Keep moving," Evelyn urged, glancing over her shoulder. "We need to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible." Jack limped beside her, his face pale. "What if it follows us? Or call something else to finish the job?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't have to, his fear was her own. Hours passed as they navigated the dense forest. The glow of the moon barely pierced the thick canopy, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move when they weren't looking. Eventually, they stumbled upon a clearing, where a shallow stream trickled lazily through a cluster of moss-covered rocks. "We'll rest here," Evelyn said, helping Jack lower himself onto a fallen log. Jack winced as he stretched out his injured leg. "I don't think I can keep going much longer. Whatever that thing was, it's not just my leg that hurts. I feel drained, like it took something from me." Evelyn sat down beside him, her hands trembling as she pulled the tattered map from her backpack. The edges were singed, the paper warped from their earlier encounter, but the symbols and paths were still visible. "Why are you looking at that?" Jack asked, his voice sharp. "Because it's all we have," Evelyn replied. "The map brought us here, but it didn't lead us out. There has to be something we missed. Some clue." Jack's expression darkened. "That map is cursed, Evelyn. We need to burn it and leave this whole nightmare behind." Evelyn didn't respond. She traced her fingers over the intricate lines, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the map despite its ominous history. As Evelyn studied the map, a faint warmth spread through her palm. She looked down to see the cut left by the keeper glowing faintly, the lines of the wound forming a strange, rune-like pattern. "Jack," she whispered, showing him her hand. "Do you see this?" Jack's eyes widened. "That wasn't there before." "What does it mean?" "I don't know," Evelyn admitted. "But I think it's connected to the map." Before Jack could respond, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, more insistent. Evelyn and Jack exchanged a panicked glance, their eyes scanning the dark forest. "Do you hear that?" Evelyn asked. Jack nodded, his face pale. "It's coming from everywhere." The whispers coalesced into a chorus of voices, their tones harsh and accusing. The air around the clearing grew colder, and the shadows deepened unnaturally. "You should not have come," a disembodied voice hissed. Evelyn sprang to her feet, clutching the map tightly. "Who's there?" The shadows at the edge of the clearing shifted, forming vague, humanoid shapes. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their translucent forms flickered like dying flames. "They are the lost," Evelyn said softly, remembering the keeper's words. "The spirits of those who came before us." "Then why are they still here?" Jack asked, his voice shaking. As if in response, one of the figures lunged toward them. Evelyn and Jack scrambled backward, but the spirit stopped abruptly, its form rippling like water. "You carry the mark," it said, its voice filled with both fear and anger. "You are bound to the keeper's will." Evelyn looked down at her glowing hand, dread pooling in her stomach. "What does that mean? What does the mark do?" The spirit didn't answer directly. Instead, it pointed a translucent finger at the map. "The path you seek leads only to death. Turn back while you still can. Jack scoffed bitterly. Turn back? We don't even know how to leave this cursed forest. Another spirit stepped forward, its form flickering ominously. The keeper will not let you leave. The mark ensures that you are his until you fulfill your purpose. Purpose? Evelyn echoed. The spirits didn't respond. Instead, they began to fade, their whispers growing softer until they disappeared entirely, leaving Evelyn and Jack alone once more. We can't keep going, Jack said firmly. If the spirits are right, this map is just leading us to more danger. Evelyn shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. We don't have a choice, Jack. This mark, this map, they're tied together. If we don't figure out what it all means, we'll never escape. Jack hesitated, then sighed. Fine. But if we're doing this, we need to be smart about it. Evelyn nodded, her resolve hardening. We'll follow the map, but cautiously. No more rushing in blind. She studied the map again, noticing a small, previously overlooked symbol near the edge of the parchment. A spiral carved into the corner. It seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive. This symbol, Evelyn said, pointing it out to Jack. It wasn't glowing before. I think it's showing us the next step. Jack frowned but didn't argue. Then let's get it over with. Following the map's directions, Evelyn and Jack found themselves deeper in the forest, where the trees grew taller and closer together. The air was stifling, and the ground beneath their feet felt unnaturally soft, as though they were walking on flesh instead of soil. The spiral symbol on the map seemed to grow brighter the closer they got to their destination. Finally, they reached a clearing unlike any they had seen before. At its center stood a stone altar, covered in moss and carved with strange symbols that matched the ones on Evelyn's hand. What is this place? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn approached the altar cautiously. It's some kind of waypoint. I think we're meant to do something here. As she touched the altar, the mark on her hand flared with blinding light, and the ground beneath them began to shake. The shaking intensified, and the ground split open, revealing a cavernous pit below. From the darkness emerged another creature, smaller than the keeper but no less terrifying. Its skin was black and glistening, its elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. You should not have come, it hissed, its voice echoing eerily. Evelyn and Jack backed away, but the creature lunged toward them, its movements unnaturally fast. Evelyn raised her glowing hand instinctively, and the creature froze, its eyes locked on the mark. You bear the keeper's sigil, it growled, recoiling slightly. But that will not protect you forever. Before Evelyn could respond, the creature retreated into the pit, leaving them shaken and breathless. What was that? Jack asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, Evelyn replied, her heart pounding. But I think it was a warning. As the pit sealed itself, the altar began to glow, revealing another path on the map. This one marked with a blood-red X. Evelyn stared at it, dread settling heavily in her chest. This is far from over, she said. Jack nodded grimly. Then we better be ready for whatever comes next. The red X on the map seemed to pulse with a faint, menacing light as Evelyn stared at it. The lines leading to it twisted and coiled like a serpent, wrapping around the edges of the page. Though they were still in the forest, it felt as though something had shifted in the air. Every breath seemed heavier, and the trees loomed darker, their branches now claw-like against the waning moonlight. We can't ignore it, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. Jack gave her a skeptical look, his exhaustion clear. And what do you think happens when we follow it? It's not like the maps led us anywhere safe so far. I know, Evelyn admitted, gripping the map tighter. But we're running out of choices. If this mark means we're tied to the keeper, then maybe that X is the only way to break free. Jack hesitated, but the look in Evelyn's eyes convinced him. Fine, he muttered. But the moment things get worse, we're turning back. The forest seemed to guide them now, as though the map's magic extended into the real world. The trees twisted away to form a narrow path lined with thorn-covered vines. Evelyn led the way, her glowing hand illuminating the dark trail. The air grew colder with every step, and a low hum vibrated through the ground beneath them. It wasn't long before the hum turned into whispers, faint and indistinct, yet undeniably there. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder at Jack, who was limping but determined to keep pace. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Jack nodded grimly. "Yeah. And I don't think we're alone." As if on cue, a shadow darted across the path ahead of them. Evelyn froze, her breath hitching. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Jack nodded, his hand tightening around the makeshift club he'd carved from a fallen branch earlier. "Whatever it is, let's hope it doesn't notice us." The path eventually led them to another clearing, this one dominated by a massive stone archway. The arch was ancient, its surface carved with symbols identical to those on Evelyn's hand. Beneath the arch stood a figure cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. Evelyn and Jack stopped in their tracks. "Who are you?" Evelyn called out, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, echoing through the clearing. "I am the Guardian," it said. "The path you seek lies beyond this gate. But to proceed, you must offer tribute." Jack frowned. "Tribute? What kind of tribute?" The Guardian raised a skeletal hand and pointed at Evelyn's glowing palm. "The mark binds you to the Keeper. Your tribute will determine whether you are worthy to face him." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "And if I refuse? Then you will remain here," the Guardian said simply, "until the forest claims you." Evelyn stepped closer to the Guardian, her mind racing. "What kind of tribute does the Keeper want?" The Guardian extended its hand, palm up, revealing a small, jagged dagger made of black stone. "Blood," it said, "a symbol of your willingness to endure the Keeper's trials." Jack stepped forward, his face pale with anger. "You can't seriously be considering this. We don't even know what's on the other side of that gate." Evelyn turned to him, her expression pained. "Jack, we've come this far. If we stop now, we'll be stuck here forever." Jack looked at her, his jaw clenched. Finally, he let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine. But if this goes south, I'm dragging you out of here myself." Evelyn took the dagger from the Guardian, its surface cold and uncomfortably smooth in her hand. She hesitated, staring at the glowing mark on her palm. "What happens if I do this?" she asked the Guardian. "You will be bound to the path," it replied. "The Keeper will know your name, and your fate will be sealed." Evelyn swallowed hard. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed the blade to her palm and drew it across the glowing mark. Pain flared through her hand as blood dripped onto the forest floor. The symbols on the archway began to glow, and the ground beneath them trembled. The Guardian stepped aside, motioning for them to pass. "The Keeper awaits." Evelyn and Jack stepped cautiously through the archway, the glow from the symbols casting an eerie light on the path ahead. The forest beyond was different, darker, more oppressive. The air was thick, and the whispers were louder now, almost deafening. "What now?" Jack asked, his voice barely audible over the whispers. Evelyn looked at the map. The red X seemed brighter, almost as if it were burning into the page. "We keep going," she said. As they walked, the path grew narrower, the trees on either side pressing closer together. Shadows flitted between the trunks, and strange shapes seemed to materialize in the corner of their vision. "We're being followed," Jack said, gripping his makeshift weapon tightly. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding. "Just keep moving. Don't stop." The path finally opened up into a wide clearing, at the center of which was a massive, yawning pit. The edges of the pit were lined with jagged rocks, and a faint, red glow emanated from its depths. Evelyn and Jack approached cautiously, peering over the edge. The pit seemed bottomless, but the glow pulsed like a heartbeat. "This has to be it," Evelyn said. Jack frowned. "It looks like a trap." Before Evelyn could respond, the ground beneath them shook violently. The red glow intensified, and a deep, guttural roar echoed from the pit. "What's happening?" Jack shouted. Evelyn looked at the map, which was now glowing so brightly it hurt her eyes. "I don't know, but I think we just woke something up." The roar grew louder, and the ground began to split apart, sending Evelyn and Jack scrambling to keep their balance. From the pit emerged a massive, shadowy figure, its form wreathed in flame and darkness. "You have come far," the creature rumbled, its voice shaking the air. "But your journey is not yet over." Evelyn and Jack stood frozen as the creature loomed above them, its glowing eyes locked onto Evelyn's marked hand. What are you?" Evelyn managed to stammer. The creature let out a low, menacing laugh. "I am your trial." The shadowy creature towered over Evelyn and Jack, its form shifting like smoke caught in a gale. Its glowing, fiery eyes locked onto Evelyn, the mark on her palm burning in response. The oppressive heat radiating from the creature made it hard to breathe, and the ground beneath their feet felt as though it might collapse at any moment. "You have sought the Keeper," the creature growled, its voice reverberating through the clearing. "Now, you must prove yourself worthy to stand before him." Jack raised his makeshift club, his knuckles white. "We don't have time for this," he barked. "We didn't come here to play games." The creature's eyes shifted to Jack, narrowing with a cold, calculated intensity. "This is no game, mortal. This is survival." The air around them shimmered, and the clearing began to transform. The jagged rocks and the massive pit faded, replaced by an endless void of blackness. Evelyn and Jack stood on a narrow stone platform suspended in the abyss. The creature remained, now encircling them like a predator stalking its prey. "You must choose," the creature said, its voice like the crackling of a distant wildfire. "Choose what?" Evelyn asked, clutching the glowing map against her chest. The creature raised a massive clawed hand, and two stone pedestals emerged from the void, one on each side of the platform. On the left pedestal rested an ornate golden key, its surface etched with intricate runes. On the right was a jagged dagger, its blade shimmering with an eerie red light. "The key will grant you safe passage to the Keeper's domain," the creature explained. "The dagger, however, will give you the power to face the dangers ahead. But know this, only one of you may wield the chosen item." Jack's eyes darted between the key and the dagger. "This is a setup," he muttered. "How do we know this isn't just some twisted trick?" The creature's laughter echoed through the void. "You do not. The choice is yours to make." Evelyn turned to Jack, her heart pounding. "What do we do?" Jack hesitated, staring at the pedestals. "We don't know what's waiting for us ahead. If we take the key, we might avoid whatever horrors are in store. But if we take the dagger, we might have a fighting chance if things go south." Evelyn's mind raced. The Keeper's domain was a mystery, and the creature's words offered little reassurance. She glanced down at the glowing mark on her palm, a constant reminder of the stakes. "I think," Evelyn began, her voice trembling, "I think we need the dagger. The map has been nothing but danger so far. I doubt the Keeper's going to make this easy for us." Jack nodded reluctantly. "All right, but if you're taking the dagger, you need to be ready to use it." Evelyn swallowed hard and stepped toward the right pedestal. The dagger seemed to hum as she reached for it, its glow intensifying. The moment her fingers closed around the hilt, a sharp pain shot through her arm, and the mark on her hand flared brightly. The creature let out a low growl of approval. "The choice is made." The void trembled, and the platform began to crack. Evelyn stumbled back, clutching the dagger tightly. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the crumbling edge. "What's happening now?" he shouted over the deafening roar of the collapsing void. The creature loomed above them, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke and flame. "Your trial begins," it said, its voice echoing as it faded away. The darkness around them shattered like glass, and they were plunged into a dizzying freefall. Evelyn screamed, the dagger clutched tightly in her hand. Jack's grip on her arm was the only thing keeping her grounded as they tumbled through the abyss. They landed with a jarring thud on cold, hard ground. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around them. Evelyn groaned, pushing herself up and squinting into the dim light. They were in a massive cavern, its walls lined with jagged rocks that seemed to glisten with some kind of slimy residue. Stalactites hung from the ceiling, dripping a dark, viscous liquid. The cavern floor was uneven, littered with bones and fragments of stone. Jack helped Evelyn to her feet, his expression grim. Where are we? Evelyn shook her head, her hand instinctively tightening around the dagger. I think this is part of the trial. A low, guttural growl echoed through the cavern, sending shivers down their spines. Evelyn and Jack spun around, their eyes scanning the shadows. The growl grew louder, and from the darkness emerged 3 monstrous creatures. They were humanoid in shape but grotesquely twisted, their flesh mottled and covered in jagged scars. Their eyes glowed with the same fiery red light as the dagger, and their mouths were filled with razor-sharp teeth. Jack raised his makeshift club, his face pale but determined. Looks like we're not alone. Evelyn held the dagger out in front of her, the blade pulsing with a faint red glow. The creatures advanced slowly, their movements predatory and deliberate. What do we do? Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Jack glanced at the dagger. You chose that thing for a reason. Let's hope it's enough. The creatures lunged simultaneously, their movements unervingly fast. Jack swung his club, managing to knock one back, but the other 2 were already closing in. Evelyn dodged to the side, the dagger feeling strangely light in her hand. As one of the creatures lunged at her, she slashed with the dagger, and to her surprise, the blade cut through the creature's flesh like butter. The wound glowed red, and the creature let out an unearthly shriek before collapsing to the ground. It works! Evelyn shouted, her adrenaline surging. Jack was struggling with the other 2 creatures, their claws tearing at his clothes. Evelyn rushed to his side, slashing at the nearest creature. The blade struck true, and the creature fell, its body disintegrating into ash. The final creature hesitated, its glowing eyes locked onto the dagger. With a guttural growl, it retreated into the shadows, disappearing from sight. Jack collapsed to the ground, breathing heavily. That was too close. Evelyn nodded, her hands shaking as she wiped the dagger on her jeans. We need to keep moving. As they caught their breath, the cavern began to rumble, and the walls shifted as if alive. The bones on the floor clattered, and a deep voice echoed through the space. You have proven your strength, the voice said, its tone filled with malice. But the true trial lies ahead. A massive stone door appeared on the far side of the cavern, covered in glowing runes. Evelyn and Jack exchanged a wary glance. Ready? Jack asked, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Evelyn tightened her grip on the dagger, the mark on her palm burning hotter than ever. Not even close, she admitted. But we don't have a choice. They approached the door, its ominous glow casting long shadows across the cavern. As they reached for the handle, the voice spoke again, louder this time. Enter, if you dare. The door creaked open, revealing a swirling vortex of red and black light. Evelyn and Jack hesitated for only a moment before stepping through, the door slamming shut behind them. Evelyn and Jack stumbled out of the vortex and into an immense chamber. The air was heavy, the oppressive weight of ancient secrets pressing against their chests. The walls of the room seemed alive, shifting with faint whispers and fleeting shadows. In the center stood a massive stone altar, glowing with runic inscriptions. Atop it sat a skeletal figure cloaked in black, its empty eye sockets blazing with crimson light. The keeper, Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. The skeletal figure stirred, the sound of cracking bones echoing through the chamber. You have come far, it intoned, its voice cold and hollow. But your journey ends here. The keeper rose from the altar, its bony fingers curling as tendrils of darkness coiled around its form. The map you carry was never meant to be found. Its secrets are bound by blood, and its price must be paid. Jack stepped forward, gripping his makeshift club. We didn't ask for this. We just wanted to survive. The keeper's hollow gaze fixed on him. Survival is earned, not given. It raised one hand, and the chamber began to shake. Shadows materialized into monstrous figures, their glowing eyes locking onto Evelyn and Jack. Evelyn's mark burned hotter than ever, and she clutched the dagger tightly. The blade pulsed with energy, as if alive, responding to her growing fear. Face your final trial, the keeper commanded, and the shadowy figures charged. The creatures surrounded them, their movements swift and fluid. Jack swung his club, managing to knock one back, but another latched onto his arm with clawed hands. Evelyn slashed with the dagger, the blade cutting through the shadows like fire through darkness. The dagger's power seemed to grow with each strike, its glow intensifying until the shadows recoiled, hissing. Evelyn moved with a confidence she didn't know she had, each swing of the blade driving the creatures back. But for every shadow they destroyed, two more appeared. "We can't keep this up," Jack shouted, his voice strained. Evelyn's gaze darted to the altar. The map still glowed faintly in her satchel, the mark on her palm searing like a brand. An idea began to form. "The map," she said, dodging another attack. "It's the key. We have to use it." Evelyn and Jack fought their way to the altar, the shadowy creatures clawing at their heels. As they reached the stone platform, Evelyn yanked the map from her satchel and spread it across the altar. The runes on the stone flared to life, matching the symbols on the map. The keeper loomed above them, its skeletal form towering. "You dare invoke the map's power?" Evelyn ignored the keeper's words, her focus on the glowing runes. The dagger in her hand pulsed violently, and she realized what she had to do. "It wants blood," she said, her voice trembling. "What?" Jack asked, barely managing to fend off a shadow creature. Evelyn met his eyes, tears streaming down her face. "The map is bound by blood. It needs a sacrifice to end this." Jack's face fell, but he nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "If that's what it takes, we do it together." Evelyn gripped the dagger tightly, her hands shaking. She pressed the blade against her palm, cutting deeply. Blood dripped onto the map, and the runes flared brighter, illuminating the entire chamber. The shadows screamed, their forms disintegrating as the altar absorbed the blood. The keeper let out a deafening roar, its skeletal frame cracking and splintering. "This is not the end," it bellowed, its voice echoing as its body began to collapse. "The map's curse will never be broken." The chamber trembled violently, and chunks of the ceiling began to fall. Evelyn and Jack clung to the altar as the light from the runes grew blinding. With one final, earth-shattering roar, the keeper disintegrated into ash, and the shadows vanished. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting. When Evelyn and Jack opened their eyes, they found themselves back in the antique shop where their journey began. The map lay on the counter, its glow faded. The shop was quiet, the air still. "Is it over?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. Evelyn picked up the map, now nothing more than an old piece of parchment. The mark on her palm had disappeared, leaving only a faint scar. "I think so," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. As they stepped outside, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the street. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt a sense of peace. Months later, the antique shop closed its doors for good. No one knew what happened to its mysterious owner or why the shop had suddenly disappeared. Evelyn and Jack returned to their lives, forever changed by their harrowing journey. They vowed never to speak of the map or the horrors they had faced. But deep in the wilderness, far from any human settlement, a traveler stumbled upon a cave. Inside, they found a glowing map, etched with runes and stained with blood. And the cycle began again.